program. If you want to just grab some food and find a seat up front. I would like to welcome you to our first SCI Connect and Inspire series event. My name is Jennifer Baker-Jones, and it is my pleasure to serve as your MC today. I'm the board chair of SCI, and I'm pleased to support the organization because of the unique way SCI works to build community and build community leaders. Today's event will feature a presentation of the Connect for Community Impact Award and a panel discussion about collaboration. Before we go to the awards presentation, we're going to take a few minutes to hear about SCI's mission and recent accomplishments. First, let me introduce David Crowley, founder of SCI.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good to be passing a real mic and not a virtual one on Zoom this year. Thank you all for coming. Before I get into the remarks I had prepared, I would like to pause for a moment to honor the legacy of an amazingly powerful leader that we lost this week, Mr. Mel King. I think here today, talking about collaboration for more equitable communities, we are definitely honoring his legacy. So I would ask you to join me in a moment of silence in his honor. Thank you. SCI has now been cultivating connections among diverse community members across Greater Boston communities for over 20 years. I'd like to share with you a few examples of how that focus on building relationships has made a difference. I don't know if you can remember the winter of 2015. We got a lot more snow than this winter, and a lot more snow than we've ever gotten in the city of Boston. I was driving to a meeting with the local director of the senior center, and she started telling me about how many seniors in our community had not left their home in weeks for want of resources to get the snow cleared from their driveways and walkways, so they were not able to get out to shop or get to medical appointments. By the end of that commute to the meeting we were going to, we had hatched a plan for recruiting volunteers to help the seniors in their neighborhoods that had not been able to get out. And so there, very quickly, we were able to cultivate those neighborly connections, get the shoveling done, and the seniors out to where they needed to go. Several years later, a much bigger crisis than the snowstorm hit in the form of the pandemic. And so SCI, like so many organizations, had to figure out how do we figure out what resources we have to deploy to address this challenge. And for us, that was really about the connections we had built over time. So we were all about thinking about how do we meet those pressing needs of the moment. And one of the great examples of that was an SCI AmeriCorps member named Paloma Suarez, who was serving at the South End Community Health Center at the time. She had really taken our trainings to heart about building relationships, and by the time of March of 2020 hit, she had a great network of relationships that she was quickly able to tap in order to set up some emergency food services out of the health center, realizing that people aren't going to be healthy if they can't eat. So she alone was responsible for coordinating partnerships that led to hundreds of families, mostly frontline workers, getting the food they needed to get through those early days of the pandemic. And we were doing similar work throughout our service area. Then, as things evolved, of course, over the last several years, we had to step back and think about how do we continue building on those relationships for the longer-term needs that we are confronted with in terms of what do we need to do for more healthy and equitable communities. And so that's been a big part of our work over the last couple of years. One of those pieces of work has involved a program where we are training grassroots community leaders to go out and spread the word about the safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccines. And it so happens we are focused on 4 communities with that project, and one of them is Malden, which we're going to be talking about more very soon. So yay, yeah, you can clap for Malden. In fact, Vitali's back there, you can meet Vitali, who runs that program for us. Actually starts every Monday morning with, well, actually after our staff meeting, and she quickly hops onto a call with a group of Malden folks that are doing that work to make sure that as many people as possible, the immigrant community and everyone, knows about the vaccine and knows about the many vaccination opportunities that the community has made available through those partnerships. So another great example of partnering. So really part of SCI's formula for having big impact as a relatively small organization is about building on relationships. But a second part of our formula is about developing leaders. And you saw that a little bit when I talked about Paloma. But we have another very exciting example of that leadership development work coming up actually this Saturday, and a few folks here are involved in a program called the SCI Youth Pitch Contest. And we will be, there will be 8 teams of teens converging on the Microsoft Center in Cambridge on Saturday, who have been working for 6 weeks to develop and hone presentations for an idea to improve a community issue in their neighborhood. Many of them are focused on mental health as well as some other needs. And so it's going to be so much fun to hear what the youth have come up with. A great cross-section of communities in our region will be participating. And if you're interested in learning more, you can talk to me. Our Polly here has been leading that one after picking up the torch from Phil Gordon, who really conceived of the idea of this program 2 years ago. So another example of how SCI is making a difference. We find that by focusing on cultivating connections, building relationships, helps us have impact over time. That initiative I mentioned that started in 2015 with the Senior Center has really grown and flourished and expanded so that we not only shovel for seniors in the winter, but we also rake for them, get volunteers raking for seniors in the fall. That's a little more predictable, as you might imagine, than the snow shoveling operation. And you know, I have to say, kind of thankfully, there's been a little less snow to shovel this winter than most, but we did have our volunteer crew out several times, you know, even if it's a couple inches, as you know, that still has to get clear for the seniors to get out. And after the last time we had the volunteer crew out, I got a call from a woman who was so thankful for the service. And she started to explain to me why. It turns out her husband, who had just recently passed away, was, until his health started declining a couple of years ago, he was the guy in the neighborhood who was the first one out there, you know, when the snow was starting to pile out, to go and help his neighbors. And he did that for decades in that neighborhood. And so she was just so touched and moved, you could tell just even over the phone that she was practically in tears with the gratitude that had come back around to help her. When we focus on cultivating those connections, powerful things happen. I would now like to turn to our Deputy Director, Phil Gordon, to share more about SCI's work. Share more about SCI's work.
Hi, my name is Phil Gordon. Thank you all for being here today with us today. I'm the Deputy Director at Social Capital Inc. I'm just going to take a couple more minutes to tell you one more story before we move on to the panel line. We're really all here today. So for the past 2 years, it's been my honor to organize the first and second ever Juneteenth celebrations in the city for SCI. It all started in 2021 when Jennifer Jones, our board chair, asked David and I around March of that year if SCI would take the lead on organizing an event in our community, with a few $100s allocated by the Uber Democratic City Committee to honor the newly recognized state and federal holiday. Somewhat reluctantly, if I'm being honest, I took on the task, but I was quickly blown away by what we accomplished in less than 3 months. I say we because it took the commitment of dozens of community members, the support of local and state government officials such as Mayor Scott Galvin and Massachusetts State Senator Cindy Freeman, and the collaborative partnerships of community organizations like the NAACP Mystic Valley Branch. After 200 people showed up in year one, I realized that what we've created and begun had so much more potential to bring people together in a way that could positively uplift the community. For year two of Juneteenth Woburn, I set a goal of doubling our attendance, and we did. But we also expanded the program and had the honor of having Michael Curry, who was actually one of this year's SCI Idealist honorees, as our first ever keynote speaker. Another piece we added was an art exhibit featuring 3 Boston area Black artists, where I got connected to Joseph Joey James, a music and visual artist from Cambridge that recently moved to England with his family. Through Joey, I met his wife Marie, also originally from Cambridge, who has been serving with us as a community engagement coordinator in our SCI AmeriCorps program. Marie's help in organizing Juneteenth Woburn 2023 has been invaluable. The main event logo and the event flyer and our Juneteenth apparel was all designed by Marie. And you can actually pick up the flyer here today if you're interested. And that's just a fraction of the impact Marie has had in our organization and the Movement community so far this year. I've also been able to work with Joey again on Juneteenth as we are organizing a concert portion of the event to promote local Black hip-hop artists. But I think the most exciting thing that we will be able to do, most exciting thing this year is that we will be able to welcome the recently inaugurated Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Andrea Joy Campbell, as our keynote speaker. For me, that is the ultimate reflection of collaboration at this moment in my life, because while I may be organizing the event, I definitely could not have made that happen by myself. When I think about collaboration, I imagine seeing the equation wins cubed, because true collaborations, like the ones I just mentioned, always multiply upon themselves for the benefit of all. 20 years on, it's why SCI's mission continues to resonate with me and many others, why I continue to push our team for excellence, and why I hope you continue to support our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And I didn't know what he was going to say about Juneteenth, and it was making me get a little bit teary over here, because Phil has really done a tremendous and outstanding job, and I'm forever grateful for him taking that off. And I said, hey, what do you think? He's really done a fantastic job, so thank you, Phil. As you may know, the SCI Connect and Inspire series is our biggest fundraiser of the year. Your donations help SCI cultivate connections and strengthen our communities. Your support is so crucial at this time because we must continue to leverage our relationships to address the inequities that persist in our communities. We are grateful for the support that we have received thus far from our generous sponsors, and we have raised over $57,000 already. Now our goal is to raise an additional $15,000 between our 2 Connect and Inspire series events. To donate today, simply send a text message to 50155 with SCI 2023 as the text message, and then follow the prompts. You'll see on our slides here, it's up at the very top there, and you'll see it throughout our presentations today. So, and I believe it's also in your booklet, so it's very easy to do, and we appreciate all of the support that you help us with. Now it's time for our Connect for Community Impact presentation. Eastern Bank has generously sponsored this award since 2016. I would now like to turn it over to Eastern's CEO, Bob Rivers. But first, I'd like to say how much we appreciate your support of SCI, Bob, and for how many years you've been a part of this program and building community. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that, Jennifer, and good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for being here. As Jennifer mentioned, I've been involved with this event for some time now, and I want to thank Alberto Calvo, founder of Shop and Compare Supermarkets, for introducing me to SCI back now 8 years ago. And this is one of my favorite events of the year. I hope you will feel as I do. You get so much out of this. Phil, your remarks Again, this reminds me of why I love coming to this event. What you've done, and actually how you did it. I'm always marvel at, it's usually younger people who have their remarks prepared on their iPhone. And I thought about doing that at times. I'm just scared to death of it. Somehow it'll flash or reset or won't be able to unlock my phone.
Not my preference.
So I always keep it on paper. But again, very much thrilled to be a part of this. The other thing that I've always enjoyed in the past, and I didn't hear this year, David, so maybe when you get up later you can share this, is how this organization came to be. That origin story, I think, is one of the more moving things and instructional things I've ever heard. So hopefully we'll find a way to work that into the program later today. So again, just a huge fan of this organization, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. Thanks for your work, David, for what you've done now for so many years with your team. It's really quite impressive and moving. There's been so many things that have driven us apart over the past 3 years, either physically or philosophically. Issues that have stressed the shared values, networks, and collaboration that are the necessary ingredients for developing social capital. However, we have nonetheless witnessed a degree of engagement between leaders from different sectors and constituencies throughout our community higher than ever before. Something that we'll address during our panel discussion later in the program. Organizations like SCI support and facilitate such cross-sectoral and cross-cultural convenings like today's, and we are very grateful for it. For the past 8 years, I've had the privilege of presenting SCI's annual Connect for Community Impact Award to leaders in various Massachusetts gateway cities, people who have leveraged their own social capital and that of others in their community to make a significant positive impact in a variety of ways. But until now, we've never had an honoree who could actually predict the weather. Let me explain. On February 8th, just 6 days after Puxatawny Phil, the famous Pennsylvania groundhog, saw his shadow and declared that we would have 6 more weeks of winter, Malden Mayor Gary Christenson lifted his city's winter parking restrictions. Now, I recognize some of you might not know Gary, and you might be wondering if he was new to the Boston area. After all, hadn't he heard of the famous April Fool's Day blizzard that dumped 2 to 3 feet of snow in the Boston area 26 years ago this Saturday? Well, as a Malden mayor and someone who was working for the Massachusetts House Ways and Means Commission at that time, rest assured, Gary remembers it well. So, this bold prediction, I think, really typifies the type of visionary leadership that Mayor Christenson has displayed throughout his 11 years as Malden's mayor and his 30 years of public service. Since becoming mayor in 2012, Gary has established Malden, the second most diverse city in Massachusetts, with almost 43% of its residents born outside the United States, as a vibrant gateway city with a lively downtown, effective cross-sector collaboration, and inclusive economic development, characterized by one of the highest number of immigrant-owned businesses in the Commonwealth. For Mayor Christenson, it is this diversity that gives Malden its strength and assures its strong, proud future. So I've known Gary for a little bit, and I've been around Malden quite a bit over the years too, and there's a whole bunch that I could tell you about what's gone on in that city that is great, and how much of it Gary had a part of it in his many roles in government. But hopefully he'll share some of that as part of his remarks. So without further ado, Gary, I am delighted to present to you SCI's annual Connect for Community Impact Award.
Well, now you know why one of the things I like the least about being mayor is accepting awards. I would much rather be working on policy, advocating for more state funding, or predicting the weather. But I am grateful to be here today because the recognition is a true celebration of all that goes on in our community day in and day out. And it's a rare treat to leave the Malden city limits. First, I must acknowledge my gratitude to Bob Rivers, CEO of Eastern Bank, for this recognition and to the team at SCI. When we were notified that the City of Malden was selected for the Connect for Community Impact Award, we were beyond honored. Social capital is defined as networks of relationships among those who work together in a society to enable that society to function effectively. I did not realize there was a term for what we have been doing here in Malden all along. Thanks to the people assembled in this room from Malden and many who could not be here, we are on our way to a full recovery from the COVID pandemic, and I believe will end up being stronger than ever. Like many communities, we struggled during the pandemic with housing issues, food insecurity, and people losing their jobs. Working with the federal and state government, including state representatives Paul Donato and Kate Lipper-Garabedian, who are here today, nonprofit organizations, businesses, and community groups, we collaborated on each of these issues, which I am certain has led to our recovery. Furthermore, several of our housing strategies, by working with Angie Liu from ACDC to address the pandemic, are now permanent features in our city. We have developed partnerships with the YMCA Food Pantry, the Food Link, and the Food Drive, in addition to our long-standing partnership with Malden's own Bread of Life to combat food insecurity. Thanks to Tammany Rock, we continue to have high vaccination rates in the City of Malden. Finally, Kashana Holling, who is here today, not only kept the Summer Youth Employment Program going through the pandemic, but has expanded it to include adults and seniors returning to the workforce. We also had, thanks to Sandy Silk from Jefferson Apartment Group, who is also here today, our downtown has been transformed and reimagined. The old monolithic City Hall, which for more than 40 years made Malden Center a dead end, has been replaced, and in its place stands a mixed-use development with apartments, retail, and a 45,000 square foot condo for City Hall. Malden is now thriving on nights and weekends as a result. Representing Berkeley Investments at today's event is Dan McGrath, whose firm has made a significant investment in the 350,000 square foot Exchange 200 to attract life science companies to Malden. Exchange 200 is considered one of the hottest R&D properties in the greater Boston area. What I have been especially proud of, though, is the city's response to racial injustice. I can proudly say that having hard conversations and collaborating with many nonprofit organizations has resulted in Malden having its first ever DEI officer and language access officer. Elena Martinez is here today. And thanks to Police Chief Glenn Cronin, who is also here, we have a completely revamped use of force policy, along with a citizen engagement group that will meet with the police department on a regular basis starting this year. Malden is one of the most diverse communities in Massachusetts. In fact, our promotional materials encourage residents and visitors to dine in Malden, taste the world. We are particularly proud that there are 63 languages spoken at our high school. This has prompted me to regularly give greetings of the city and remarks in several languages. 大家好，我是Malden市长，今天你好。I hope what I just said was, hello everyone, I'm Malden Mayor Gary Christenson. Today is wonderful. As you can probably guess, my staff dreads taping these slides. Malden also has the distinction of being only the second city in the Commonwealth in which the transliteration bill has been enacted, allowing for the transliteration of a candidate's name in Chinese on electoral ballots. 26% of Malden's population is Asian American, and we are confident that this law will help to ensure full and meaningful access and participation when it comes to voting. This is but a selection of the positive developments that have happened through hard work, collaboration, determination, and by always keeping the lines of communication open. What I have found through working with these dedicated people is that if you can find a way to work hard, remain committed, and be positive, change can happen. And that is just what has been happening in the city of Malden. I will continue to be humbled by this award, and I and our team will continue to work to always make us worthy of this recognition. Thank you again for recognizing me and the great city of Malden, and more importantly, the people who keep Malden moving forward.
Congratulations, Mayor, for all the well-deserved recognition and for all you're doing for the community in Malden. And we appreciate that so many Malden officials were able to join us today as well. Our panel is up next, which will focus on collaboration. We are thrilled to host this panel, and I see one of our SCI AmeriCorps alums is on it. Collaboration and connection are a foundation of the work of SCI. While the panelists make their way to the front of the room, let's take a moment to hear from fellow board member and one of SCI's earliest staff members, Marissa Luce, about the importance of connection. This clip is from a recent coffee conversation with David Crowley, and you can check these out on our YouTube page to see more. Just a quick reminder before we go to the panel that you can easily help SCI cultivate connections and strengthen communities by texting SCI 2023 to 50155. And you'll see that on the screen up here throughout the presentation. Now I'd like to reintroduce Bob Rivers, who's doing double duty today as he'll now be moderating our panel, Connect for Community Impact panel. Thank you very much, Bob.
Great. Welcome panelists. Thank you for being here. So we've got a very exciting lineup for you today. Of course, our honoree, Mayor Christenson, is part of the panel, and you've heard a lot about him already. Although I was glad that you confirmed earlier, Gary, that the real Gary Christenson actually had attended this event, and because I understand you have a body double.
Yes.
So if you go to YouTube and look at the mayor's State of the City address from this past year, you'll know what I mean, but you'll get a real kick out of it. It's very, very well done, very, very clever. So I'm going to start and introduce our panel, and I'll work down here from your far left, and start with one of my colleagues, Ed Eastern. I think everyone knows in the room probably Ron Dorsey. So I'll tell you a little bit about Ron. Ron is, well, Ron's a Renaissance man. I mean, he really doesn't know. I mean, I was looking at your bio, and it doesn't even seem to cover all the things that you've touched and are touching. But Ron is a researcher, policymaker, strategist whose career has centered around systems change and innovation. Following roles as a Barr Foundation Fellow and Chief of Education for the City of Boston, he serves as Chief Impact Officer of the Eastern Bank Foundation, basically our number 2 in the foundation, focused on issues of economic inclusion and mobility. Additionally, Ron is the co-founder of the Jazz Urbane Cafe down in Nubian Square, which is a new arts hub and full-service restaurant slated to open hopefully later this year. And he's the current board chair for the Benjamin Franklin Cummings Institute of Technology, in addition to others. So Ron, welcome. It's great to have you here. And we are also truly honored to have City Councilor Julia Mejia with us here today. Thank you, Councilor, for being here. So Councilor Mejia is currently serving as the chair of the Committee on Education, the chair of the Committee on Government Accountability, Transparency, and Accessibility, as well as the chair of the Committee on Labor, Workforce, and Economic Development. I don't know where you find time in the day. She is the first Afro-Latina to sit on the Boston City Council. So again, a historic election as well. But honestly, the thing I like and will remember about you most is all those videos you did with your daughter during the pandemic. They were great. And if you were sitting in Zoom calls in your office all day as I was, pulling those up occasionally to remind that there is a future and there is something good coming. Thank you for doing that. They were really inspiring and fun. Hopefully you had a lot of fun doing it. Your daughter sure did. And then all the way to your right is Jessica or Jay Wong, who's an SCI AmeriCorps alum and program officer for the Mass Cultural Council and Community Outreach Coordinator for the Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence. She previously served as the program director and interim executive director of the Massachusetts Asian and American Pacific Islander Commission, and recently earned her master's in public administration and Asian American studies from UMass Boston. And again, another bio that just is exhausting enough to read, let alone do. So let's jump into our discussion. And I know you all have perspectives, certainly on this one. So I'll start first with our honoree, and then I'll go to Julia, Jay, and then finally to Ron in that order. So I think as we know, there have been so many events over the past 3 years that have put tremendous stress on our collective social capital, whether it be the pandemic, the transition to really a hybrid world in so many ways, the worldwide reckoning with racial injustice, the increasingly divisive political climate, the assault on, voting rights, reproductive rights, basically any civil rights. It's just incredible. There's a lot to really be worried about. But in the face of so much adversity, we've seen social capital actually strengthen during this period. So I'd ask that you each comment on that. So, Mr. Mayor, I'll start with you.
I would say that has been, if there's such a thing, one of the positive outcomes of what we went through is it has really brought our community together. We now are doing things that we never did pre-pandemic, meaning that people are more involved, they're more engaged. The technology now allows people to participate from wherever they are in the community or in the world for that matter. We never ever contemplated that prior to what we went through. And that has resulted in a whole slew of new initiatives that we are now working on throughout Malden. For instance, we are in the midst, and that's why I purposely made sure to sit next to Jay, of opening a Malden Center for Arts and Culture. So we're going to be going to the Mass Cultural Council at some point to ask for funding. But we have worked with the state to convert the former Malden District Courthouse to this Center for Arts and Culture. So we're hoping in the next couple of years to open that, which will be a place where you can take an adult class at night to learn another language. On the weekends, you can go to Black Box Theater, see a comedy show, etc. The other thing that we have done is we now have an Office of Housing Stability. This pandemic forced us, it already had, but never more so than during that crisis, to look at where we are with housing and what we could be doing more of. When we used to get these calls prior to the pandemic, you know, we were able to address them in some ways, but during the pandemic, the numbers were just off the charts. So what we ended up doing is partnering with Housing Families Inc., which is a nonprofit in Malden, to have an office within their office to work strictly on housing issues in our community. So now that anybody calls about being evicted or being short on rent or needing to relocate in an expeditious fashion, this Office of Housing Stability, which has a city number, helps. And, you know, again, that has been a really great addition to our city. We also have done our first ever student-based health center at Malden High School. As I mentioned earlier, Tammy Lee Brock, who's here today, had found during the pandemic that we really need to help our youth, not just through the pandemic, but coming out of it. And so now we have a fully functioning health center at Malden High School that serves ages 12 to 21 and is in partnership with Cambridge Health Alliance. And just last week, ironically enough, being here today, we now have recovery coaches there warning our students about fentanyl and some of these other drugs that have devastated Malden and other cities across, not just Massachusetts, but across the country. So that has been helpful. We also have done a lot with our Chamber of Commerce. You know, we now have businesses in it that typically would never even have thought about being a part of our chamber. But thanks to the, well not thanks, but due to the pandemic, we knew that in order for us to rebound, we all have to be working together. So we have enrolled members from all segments of our business community to now be a part of the Chamber of Commerce. So those are just some of the features that have resulted after what we went through. But I can tell you this, the one good thing about it is we are much more informed and we are much more engaged now than ever before.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, next to, so Councilor, you know, as I think about this question, I think your election and your leadership are one of the examples I think of here in Boston. What other examples come to mind for you?
So, first of all, I must be doing something right because I keep getting invited back. So I'm really grateful to be here in person this time around and really grateful to be with you all this afternoon. And I'll just note for the record, in case anyone's wondering around these TikTok videos, that we really started off as an opportunity for mother and daughter to have some time together. We had been Zoomed out, and it was really an opportunity for us to have a mental health break. And we shared it with the public, not because we wanted to get any attention, but we just thought that so many people were losing hope and felt so isolated and alone, and that those daily videos became something that people could count on, some sense of stability in the times of uncertainty. So while we actually made national news around these TikToks, it really did provide a sense of normalcy during that time. So Bob, I'm glad you and everyone else who followed me on Twitter and Instagram, you can still go back if you want to know what they're talking about. It's Julia for Boston. But you know, I think when COVID first came onto the scene, you know, I really thought it was a blessing in disguise. It was going to be an opportunity for us to really recognize our collective power and to really lean into this moment and really understanding the power of the people. And that's what we saw. And as the first Afro-Latina ever elected on the council, you know, my job when I was 9 years old was to translate for my mom. And as a result of that, when COVID hit, a lot of the rental applications and a lot of the relief efforts were all in English. And maybe 2 or 3 days later, the resources were then translated into Spanish and other languages. And so as a result of that, our office worked on passing a language access ordinance, which mandated that the city, whenever anything came out in English that same day, it would come out in the top 11 languages, right? So that was, again, a blessing in disguise. It was an opportunity for us to look at some of the language justice issues that the city of Boston was facing and lean into it. The other part of it was around culturally responsive food insecurity efforts, right? As someone who has received the box of goods, oftentimes, you don't know how to cook with the food that you were getting. But sometimes you don't get upset. What we did in our office is we created an opportunity for smaller bodegas, those are little convenience stores around the way, or corner stores, whatever you want to call them. We call them bodegas. We wanted to create an opportunity for the local convenience stores to have access to resources so that they can help support neighbors right in their own backyard. Because what we saw in terms of food insecurity is that a lot of the grants were given to big ticket item organizations, and the foods that people were receiving, you didn't have your arroz and your habichuela and your little seasonings, right? So we decided to create an initiative that was specifically geared to helping to support residents, but also helping to support these small businesses. And as a result of that work, what we realized is that, when city is super intentional about putting their resources where it's going to have a double, triple line, I guess is what they're calling it, that you were able to help support communities, help support small businesses, and really create opportunities for people to be able to have access to food that was culturally responsive. Now, as a result of that, the city has implemented and has now partnered up with other nonprofit organizations to be able to help close the food insecurity gap here in the city of Boston. And I say that because the reason why we were able to come up with that program was because there was a woman who called my office who was undocumented, and she was afraid to go to the local pantry, which was 20 minutes or so away from her home. And I said to her, what's the name of the closest bodega in your neighborhood? I will call them and I will make a donation, and you could go there and pick up food that you could prepare for your family. And when you have people who are living the realities informing your work, right, then you are able to develop solutions that really meet the moment. And I think there's so many different things that COVID gave us an opportunity to do as an office that was led by the people who were living the realities. And when you think about social capital and you think about the power of the people, it is only with the people can you really design policies that are going to really get at the root of what people are struggling with. And we did that also in the education space. We created learning pods. We heard about the suburbs creating space for remote learning. And so we partnered up with the private sector to do some fundraising and opened up a learning pod in the city of Boston to help support low-income families so that they can have a place where they can drop their children off and work. And so it's things like that COVID really showed us what is possible. And as a city councilor, my job right now is I already know what's possible. Don't tell me you can't do something, because we already proved that it can be done. Now the question is, where's the political will to make sure that beyond COVID, we are continuing to push ourselves to ensure that we are once and for all really addressing a lot of the inequities that we have persisted even before COVID came. And the last thing I'll say, you can't give a politician a mic. But I have it, and I will just say one last thing is that mental health was one of the things that we saw was an incredible uptick during the pandemic, and we created a Zoom space for young people to really have a space to drop in and talk about the issues that they were facing. And so as a result of that work, we worked with Black and Brown clinicians and created an initiative in the city of Boston where we trained hairdressers and barbershops. And the concept is you're gonna get your hair done and your head fixed. And so that concept now is thriving at the Burke, because there's been an uptick around violence. And so now we've created a program that is designed specifically to help young people learn about their own mental health triggers, identify those same issues in their peers, connect their peers to the support services that they need so that we can address some of the mental health and wellness concerns. But we're taking that one step further. That's also building a pipeline and exposing young people to this as a career option. So as the chair of education and workforce development, what we're trying to do is seize this moment to really make sure that we're being as innovative as possible to address the concerns that COVID has left on us. Thank you.
Well, as a resident of the city of Boston, I'm so glad to learn so much of what you shared and feel so grateful to be represented by someone like yourself in City Council. Thank you. So we're going to go to Jay next. So Jay, what say you on this question? What examples on social capital have you seen as we go through these more challenging times?
Yeah, so I think for us, one of the biggest stressors during the pandemic was the endless amount of physical attacks, the hate speech, and the fear-mongering that surrounded the Asian community. In terms of building social capital, for us, it really started with the community organizers who have been on the ground doing this work already. You know, anti-Asian violence is nothing new. It's systemic. It's lack of language access. It's deportations of the Southeast Asian refugees. It's surveilling the South Asian community post 9/11. It's displacement through wars or housing. So I think bringing these community organizers to the front lines they have been addressing those systemic issues, bringing them to the front lines to set the demands for how we can combat anti-Asian violence, or how we can bring in other communities to stand in solidarity with us and define what that means exactly. And also from there, bringing in the elected officials to set the tone for the community as a whole. Prior to the shutdown, the Asian American Commission and community leaders had held a rally in front of the State House condemning any type of violence or discrimination towards the Asian American community. And from there, we had anyone reaching out from schools, healthcare workers, community members, private foundation, asking the question, how can we use our position to stand in solidarity with you? What does your community need? How can we help you? And so through all these conversations, educators were figuring out ways how to implement Asian American history inside their curriculums to raise awareness. Healthcare workers were further developing culturally sound therapy for victims of anti-Asian violence. Community members were on the ground organizing to patrol Chinatown to escort elders around the neighborhood to protect them. Mass Cultural Council was able to get state funding. They received a $1 million grant to Asian American arts and culture organizations who were impacted by COVID financially. So I think what really ties these communities together is having that understanding of each other's histories, each other's backgrounds, and our specific needs, because you can't come in and try to fix a problem that you have never experienced for yourself, right? So I think and also actually having the basic humanity. If you take that racial label off of us, at the end of the day, that's someone's mother getting hurt, that's someone's grandparent getting pushed to the ground, turning fatal, that's someone's child getting their face slashed because of anti-Asian violence. So I think if we, have all these basic understandings and compassion for one another, that's really what ties and builds social capital.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone? Good. That was actually fairly enthusiastic. So thank you, and thank you for having me here. And to the panelists, I want to affirm the sentiment that it's challenging for us to talk about the last few years as being years of opportunity, but it is dangerous to leave that narrative out of the last couple of years. Because there really are stories of network, social capital, and community resilience that have to be told for us to look forward to what communities will become. I think where we landed reminded me of a lyric from one of my favorite hip hop groups, Atlanta's Goody Mob, which says, "You and I got to do for you and I." And we were placed in that moment. So the moment sprouts mutual aid societies across neighborhoods. You know some of the organizations who led them, but more often than not, they were led by a whole lot of folks you don't know. It was folks who got together to figure out resource acquisition, resource distribution, and put together new systems. A lot of that capacity has gone dormant as the emergency has ebbed, but I'm not sure that we're beyond the state of emergency necessarily, and there are a lot of questions to be asked about how you further activate those civic solutions and innovations that came to the fore, because honestly, community showed up before government could. And government actually doesn't do, besides NASA, maybe the urban mechanics and some other folks, innovation very well. So it's oftentimes on communities to figure out what they need for themselves. So Julia talked about learning pods. I don't know if you remember this.
I'm sure I do. Go ahead.
But before I say it, let me make another social capital point. So 10 years ago, I used to walk into my kitchen after work some days, and Julia would be there. With my wife, group of women in a book club, and we'd catch up a little bit and figure things out. And it was really the beginning of partnership at a number of levels. My ego wants me to think that I knocked that door that got you the extra vote. And she said I did, so you heard that. But flash backward, maybe to about this time in 2020, Julia called me up and said, "I want to create a bilingual learning pod for elementary students. How do I do it?" I didn't know, but I said, if you want to do it, we're going to do it. It was calls to Vertex, Apple, Houghton Mifflin, educators, a whole bunch of folks to figure out how to do it. She led the way on it. Robert Lewis Jr., Vanessa Calderon, and a lot of folks helping to create an innovation that in the public narrative is one about the privilege of largely white families organizing with educators for themselves, but it's not really the whole story, and maybe not the most important part of the story as well. And so there is something that at this time in the pandemic, when we basically said, especially in education, everything that we invented over the last 2 years failed our kids, was a loss. You know the narrative. Untrue. It's about what and for whom it worked best and how we're going to capitalize on it. What I have a hard time thinking about, and I lament, is trying to get back to a normal that was inequitable and unfair while not taking stock of some innovations and inventions that showed up that did far better than the systems that we put in place.
Bob, you have no idea what you have really kind of created a space for us to unpack a little bit further. And I wanted to just say two things, is that to the whole idea of mutual aid groups, it was community that stepped up, but it also gave us an opportunity to recognize our own genius. We had people who were cooking, who were driving, who were supporting each other, because that's what we do. That is innate in our ability, is to build community and support each other. And what our office is doing right now is we've created a fellowship program to continue to support mutual aid groups. Because regardless of whether or not the pandemic is here or not, there's still a lot of families who are in crisis. And so a lot of these mutual aid groups need support so they can continue to build their capacity so that they can continue to serve. And I think that what happens, and you're absolutely right, government is like molasses, y'all. Have y'all ever seen honey try to come out of a bottle? That is how that is seriously how government works. And our people do not have time to wait and hope and pray that things are going to be done for them, which is why it's so important for us to continue to support innovative approaches that are being led by the people. And while I'm on the inside of government, I still have my heart and soul out in these streets, because in the streets is where you find out what you need to do. And I think mutual aid groups need to continue to be supported and provided the type of capacity building that they need to be able to continue to thrive.
Thank you. So, thank you very much for that. So I'm going to change it up on you guys a little bit because I like where we're going with this. And as you said, Councilor, unpack some things. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'd like you to unpack this one. So in 2020, there was all this attention paid to structural racism and inequities. Really, it was, I think to many people, tend to look more like me. It was somewhat of a revelation, and people sort of woke up and we had to do some stuff. And when George Floyd was murdered and others that year, the thing that occurred to me is, I don't know, I think this could last for about 6 months, this attention. I think thankfully it's lasted a little bit longer, but I'd like to hear your view in terms of the attention that's been made and the progress that's been made in it beginning to address structural racism. Not going to be addressed overnight by any stretch. But as you look at the different sectors, whether it be public sector, nonprofit, especially business, how are we doing or not doing? So, Councilor, I know you're going to fire, straight fastballs on the inside, so let me have it.
All right. So I think, we've had, if you look at Boston in particular, I say that decade after decade, the only thing that changes are the characters and the outfits that we're in. But the issues of structural racism and how we show up in this world has been consistently here in Boston. And I think that what is different for me, I believe, this time, is that it is a awakening that's happening across the country. And we can't continue to ignore that sleeping giant. That sleeping giant is awake. And I think that the private sector and philanthropy in particular, and this is one of the reasons why, Ron has been such a mentor to me, because when you are a community activist and you're trying to navigate, you have to code switch, and you have to show up in different ways, and you have to fight. And the coaching and the cultivation and the support that I received from Ron and his wife and just the community that I have surrounded myself in has helped me deal with my own imposter syndrome, right? Because the situation that we're talking about, George Floyd, we carry that. We talk ourselves out of situations and out of rooms because we don't believe in ourselves to be in those spaces, right? So I think that the work, especially around racism and barriers, I think it's everyone. The philanthropy space, they dictate who is worthy of funding based on kind of what these metrics look like, and there's so many people who are doing the work that get tapped out and they don't get supported because the white dominant culture does not recognize that people of color know how to do things. And then the situation is the same for businesses, right? You go to apply for a business loan, they want to look at your risk. They don't want to reward your innovation. And I think that in order for us to really come to terms with the fact that there's still work to do, we need to check our own privilege. And that includes even people of color, right? We walk into spaces and places and we don't recognize that we too have made it through that door. And if we don't check how we show up, and if we don't use these moments to speak truth to power, then we are doing the movement a disservice. And I think that it's that constant level of understanding that race is a problem in Boston. And that the only way we're going to tackle race is to acknowledge that it still persists and that it's okay. Because sometimes people don't want to talk about it because it makes them feel uncomfortable. I say you have to sit in that comfort and be okay with it and say, what am I doing and how am I contributing to the systemic racism that continues to persist? And only then, I think, and only then can we really get real about the conversation here in the city of Boston. But I just don't think that people are ready for it.
Some things going on in nonprofits around this, and since you're now spending a little more time in that space, what say you?
So first of all, we coach each other. Don't let her mislead you about that. You know, I think where equity is concerned, the nerve is raw. We know to respond when stuff comes up that doesn't look right, that isn't right, but we don't know yet how to respond appropriately, powerfully, and at scale. The structures that need to be shifted to make sure that racial justice is a habit, we are in startup mode on that. But it does take that level of recognition, but to also start to create the habit of showing up powerfully, all dollars in, all effort in, to do that work as well. But I will say, there's a beginning point that I think maybe we think we're past, and I'm not sure we are, because I'm not sure we're saying the same thing when we say equity. So, first of all, equity is not equality. They are not the same thing, and I think we're in agreement on that. And as a matter of fact, you've got to go through the doors of equity to get to equality. You've got to do a whole lot more for some before you can get to for all. Equity is more specific than we like to talk about. I know we like to talk about racial groups, gender groups, identity groups, but it's more specific than that. It's about left-handed sisters under 35 who grew up in Grove Hall. Not every black woman in Grove Hall, not every black woman in Boston. It's about some specific folks that you have to customize some solutions for and get them what they need. The third thing is we've got to renegotiate privilege, and that's the one where people start looking at their shoes. And it's not a zero-sum renegotiation, but sacrifice has to be made by privilege holders. And I will say there are many rooms in which I hold privilege. So I've got to sacrifice so that others can have more. And so the social capital challenge for us is that, and I'm going to get really nerdy about this, if you've heard of bonding social capital versus bridging social capital. So bonding social capital is you talking to your friends and people who believe what you believe. Bridging social capital is you talking to people who don't believe what you believe, have different perspectives, come from different backgrounds, to have conversations to better understand one another. We have to have more bridging conversations in order to get to more authentic equity conversations and authentic equity work.
This question, I'm going to go to Jay, and then I'm going to go to the mayor, and then we're going to go to a lightning round, all right?
So I'm very big on education. I think we're starting just from the ground. Particularly the young people, and getting ethnic studies into these schools. I'm not saying critical race theory, I'm not throwing that out there. I am just saying what is important is getting the ethnic studies in these schools and telling the truth about America's history, because Asian American history is U.S. history. Latin American history is U.S. history. Black history is U.S. history. Let's get these inside the schools so that people can just open up their eyes, and students of color can see, like, wow, this actually happened to. These are the stories of our families and how they came here, what their struggles were, and they can now see themselves in these textbooks. And if anything, it can inspire them, like, hey, these problems are still persisting. How can I get more involved? What can I do in my community? Who can I reach out to? What mentors can I find that I can continue making a difference in this community and become a community leader and be like all these people, run for public office. But yeah, I think education is really starting to break down the structural racism.
I would say from our vantage point in Malden is that this is something that you have to stay at. You can't just issue a press release or have a press conference. You have to do the work when no one else is looking. So for instance, our language access officer here, Elena Martinez, we meet every 2 weeks year round. And that has resulted in a number of initiatives that we would not have been able to develop if not for her. So for instance, we just had our first ever Asian American town hall where we brought the government to the Asian American community to understand exactly what it is we do and how it is we can work together. The same goes for our DEI officer. That position is not somewhere downstairs in the basement of City Hall. It sits 2 offices over from the office of the mayor. So, you know, when I talked about our police chief, who is going to be sitting with the Citizen Engagement Board starting this year, not just once or twice, but regularly, to make sure that, you know, we are moving in the right direction together. So that would be my advice when everybody leaves here today. You know, this isn't something that I think you can say that was great and it felt good, but I think the real work counts when no one else is watching.
I'd like this, in fact, use the word advice, because I think that's why we've gathered here. I know this is why I love being part of this event, is just learning about things that I didn't know and looking for ways to make a greater positive impact in our communities. And you have all offered so many great examples of that today. We're going to ask you to do one more. And I know this question is going to be the most challenging for our elected officials, because we're going to ask you to distill all of that advice into just 5 words. 5 words. 5 words. We're going to be counting. I don't know if we put it on the fundraiser. Are we charging for extra words? So I'm going to go to our city councilor and the mayor last. I'll let you, I know you might need some time to distill it. So I'm going to start with Jay. It's 5 words or less, Jay. What's your closing sort of advice to folks?
I would say remember your why and seek to understand. That was 6 words.
I think it's 5. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Engage, listen, 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 act.
Stick to this one.
Okay.
Y se lo digo en español, eso cuenta. Okay, wow. Inform, influence, inspire, lead, and humility.
Thank you all. Thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. Most of all, thanks for what you're doing and for taking the time to share with us today. Again, for our panelists, folks,
through that conversation. We have a special gift marking SCI's 20th anniversary to share with you with gratitude. As we wrap up today, just a few final notes. We have another event coming up in this series on Thursday, May 4th at 4:30 p.m. back in this space. We have our SCI Idealist Award reception honoring Michael Curry, Pam Edinger, and Natanya Craig Okendo. So that'll be a wonderful evening. We'll hope you'll be able to join us. We still have tickets and sponsorship opportunities available for that, so you can find out more information on socialcapitalinc.org, which is in our program book, or you can find Leah Mulrennan over here, and she'd be happy to help you with if you'd like to join us again. There's still time to donate today to our fundraiser. We have raised this afternoon $5,582. That is toward our goal of $15,000 by the end of our series in May. You can add to the total today, again, the last time I'll say it today, by texting SCI 2023 to 50155. On behalf of the SCI team, I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and thank you for your support of SCI. Your interest in our discussion and about how you can best collaborate to create healthy communities where we can all thrive. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. We have this space until 2 o'clock today, so feel free, if you'd like to pick up on a conversation that you started earlier, you can pick up where you left off and have some time to connect. Thank you again.